Okay, well, we're back again now. With all the disruptions that we've seen in the 13 and early 1400s, things are being reconsidered by all sorts of people, especially among the elites and the intellectuals. And we begin to see this especially in the interpretation of philosophy and the writing and the art of this period. What we want to look at is a person called William of Ockham. William of Ockham was a philosopher, and he began to examine Thomas Aquinas' synthesis that we talked about which was primary with the concept of scholasticism, reconciling what's in one's mind with one's heart, especially with the logical proofs that Aquinas had developed using the Aristotelian methods, and to prove his point about God and God's writings. Well, Ockham will say, well, wait a minute, this doesn't make a lot of sense. We can't use universals to try to explain reality. And what he's going to start doing is using philosophy, a new form of philosophy called nominalism, which is going to be derived from the Latin word for name, because he said these universals were only convenient names for things. He believes that it's impossible to know God or prove his existence through reason because God was all-powerful. And he didn't have to act logically. If God was logical, we'd understand all of the things in the universe. So what should philosophers do? When confronted with an abstract solution, one should look for the most simplistic form of analysis, the simplest thought. And this is going to be based on scientific analysis as opposed to a philosophical proof. So it's going to be looked through by observation. So people who have studied the material world look to simple answers, simple explanations to satisfy their curiosities. This is going to be called Occam's razor. Occam is going to believe that it's like splitting hairs here. In a razor, of course, you use it to shave your face or cut your hairs off your face or head. And this is going to be a way to reject the old and find through analysis the new, the simple way, the most understood way to do things. So we now begin to see philosophy attacking the old methods. And this is going to start to spawn a whole series in the 1400s of authors and people writing, and they're not going to be writing in Latin anymore. Well, let's be honest, Latin is dying out. Very few people understand it, and they're going to be writing in their local vernacular language, which will be either Italian or French, or in some cases English. And this is going to become very important. Well, this new literature is going to be based upon stories and not on hymn books, Bibles, this sort of thing. We're now going to start developing fiction writing. And one of the first of these writers is a man called Dante Alighieri, who was born in Florence. Now notice we're going to be talking about a number of Italian cities. Florence, Venice, Milan are all going to play very prominently in this period going forward here in the 1300s, because these are wealthy cities. They're making money through trade and industry, and they have lots of wealth concentrated in the hands of their elites. Well, when you have a lot of wealth, you can do one of two things. You can sit on it, which is very easy. You hoard it up, or you spend it and enjoy it. Well, many of these elites are going to spend it because they're going to feel it is important in two regards. And we'll talk about this more in depth in Chapter 10. But they're going to surround themselves through developing works of art, writing, etc., because it enhances their lives, but it also enhances the function of their cities, because their cities will be known as places of learning. Well, places of learning attract people that are smart. They bring wealth to your community, and it's an economic development factor. Let's be honest. We do it today. We want those wealthy intellectuals people of high order in our communities, because they bring not only their qualities with them, but they cause the community to prosper. And that's something that we even value today. So keep this in your forefront, because this is going to be part of what we're considering to be the period. Now, other things that we need to take into reasoning here. Dante Alighieri's book is going to be called The Divine Comedy. He was exiled from the city because of politics. He wrote this book, The Divine Comedy, and this book became so popular that it even began to resonate with people up to 100 years after his death. And it's going to be very important. Well, the Divine Comedy is really an allegory. It's going to talk about a man's soul as it journeys through despair to salvation. What happens to a person's soul after death? Well, he divided his work into 3 sections: hell, purgatory, and paradise. Well, in the Catholic Church, there's this place called Purgatory. Well, you're not quite ready for hell. You weren't that bad. And you weren't ready for paradise. You're not that good. You stay in a place called Purgatory. Well, Purgatory is a place where you're kind of in suspense, and people's prayers and thoughts and good deeds on earth will propel your soul to either damnation or to being saved. Well, he gives a kind of his opinion or reasoning about what he believes in is in each place. Hell, being fire and death and all sorts of misery and distrust. He climbs up a mountain to purgatory, where they do their penance, and then he talks about paradise. Well, this is going to shape preconceived notions about what happens to people after death. And this is going to be a very powerful situation. People are going to be fixated by this. And it's going to be a very seminal work of the period, because people are all worried about this. Am I worthy to be saved? Why am I on this earth? I keep asking you people to kind of contemplate your own existence. Why are you here? And what happens to me? Is this, I just breathe, die, and once I'm dead, that's it? I'm just, fertilizer for the ground? Or is there a place after my existence here that I'm called to? Well, we don't know, because we never get any direct response, most of us, from anybody on the other side of that coin. The dead usually don't tell us how they're faring. We only can conjecture. And, of course, this work by Dante Alighieri is one way of being able to do that conjecture. He's a guy that's put a story together, very powerful story, that's going to provoke people's thoughts. Well, there's another Florentian writer, Boccaccio, who is also going to talk about his work called the Decameron, where he talks about his eyewitness descriptions of the plague and how people responded to that catastrophe and what happened. And it's kind of like the best story that tells of the situation at that period. And that's going to be something that it's going to really expose how people were thinking, reacting, etc. Now, another one of our authors of this period, 1340 to 1400, Chaucer, the Canterbury Tales, which talks about a group of 29 different pilgrims from all sorts of vocations who are walking to Canterbury to celebrate at the shrine of Thomas Becket. And he talks about their stories and their sordid tales and stuff. And this becomes a way of revealing how 14th century society is. Well, what he's really kind of criticizing is not only the corruption in the church and the the role played by monks and priests during this period of time, but he's also talking about how people have two sort of dichotomies, a public dichotomy and a real private one that is not always in line with each other. Some people profess great faith, but they act like the biggest bunch of hypocrites around. Well, Chaucer exposed that. Many of you have read the Canterbury Tales in high school, or maybe even college as part of this. Well, these are works that are really going to be thought-provoking. Prior to this, we're reading Bibles, hymnals, etc., or philosophies, or the works of the classics. All of these are modifying and they're books that are controlled by and really support the church. Well, these are books that are supporting the church. These are books that are taking basic premises of faith in some cases. So these are going to be received in a different light. Could these have been written 200 years previously? No. But with all the things that have happened in the 1300s and 1400s, the time is ripe for these books to be written and to be read. And this is the beginning and the stirrings of what we're going to call in the next chapter the Renaissance. People taking on and challenging ideas and starting to think for themselves as opposed to parroting. Now we're going to also start to see breakthroughs in art. The art of the period, which is going to be called the use of excuse me here. This is going to be the use of oil color as opposed to tempera, and the use of realistic painting in terms of realism and symbolism, as expressed by a Flemish painter called Jan van Eyck, who is going to use brilliant colors in his works. If you look in your book, you will see the pictures of Jan van Eyck, and you will see this wonderful painting that he has with the dress of a pregnant woman dressed in green and her husband in a black robe with a black top hat. Very poignant pictures, I may say. Well, this use of oil color, using oil and pigmenting it with minerals, is going to become the fashion, as opposed to using tempera paint, which is using eggs and egg coloring to try to paint with. Well, it's going to make it more vivid, more realistic looking, and it's going to create a situation where people are going to be able to see near, like we would call today, photographic type painting. Painting that is going to be very realistic looking art. And in his paintings, if you notice this painting of Arnolfini and his bride, which was painted in 1434, there's all kinds of symbols here. The bedpost with Saint Margaret on there, the dog, the lighted candle. All of these have symbols in them to capture images for people. They recognize those symbols. Now, the other thing we're going to start to see is the East. We have this group called the Mongols who are going to be rising, and they are going to present another threat to Europe. We're going to see a growth of a massive kingdom in China, in the steppes of Mongolia, all the way into Russia. That is going to be the Mongols. Well, this Mongol Empire is going to be dominant because it's going to also disrupt trade, but it also will formulate these Eastern people into viable kingdoms, and that's going to be very important. Well, these kingdoms are going to formulate into, instead of nomadic bands under Genghis Khan, who is going to be the first leader of them, he's going to now start to they're going to start civilizing themselves, becoming more settled, and they're going to rise into 3 or 4 distinct kingdoms. And we're going to call them the Khanates, for the Khans, the leaders of the Mongols. We're going to see a Khanate of the Golden Horde. We're going to see a Khanate of Persia. We'll see a Khanate of Chagda and a Great Khan. And this is all going to be unifying these people into a civilization. And it's going to be very important because out of this group, we're going to start to see the first elements of what we will call the Russian peoples. The Chinese are going to be influenced by the Khans, and we're going to see this group in Tibet, Nepal, and then later Persia is impacted by them as well, and through the steppes of the Caucasus. So keep that in mind, that this group, many of them, some of them will convert to Christianity, others will convert to Buddhism, and that's going to be important to realize that this is going to be a rising group. And they're going to create a huge trade area which goods and ideas will flow through, and they will garner resources through trade. Well, who's going to be doing the trading? By the 1400s, there's a shift in power in terms of trading. Constantinople has lost its grip, and the trade is now beginning to come out of Venice, Italy, because the Venetian traders have better ships. They're able to sail further. They avoid a lot of the land travel, and they're cutting the trips down even further. And what they do is they come out of Venice. Let me bring a map here. They come out of Venice, and they go up into the Black Sea, into the Crimean, and then they cross over, which is going to lead them quicker to China, avoiding a lot of this land travel, because during this period of time, in the East, the Ottoman Empire has been rising. And this is going to present a great challenge to the Eastern Christian empire called Byzantium. In fact, over time, the Ottomans will conquer extensive territories, and in 1453, eventually they will conquer and destroy the remnants of the Byzantine Empire. So, 1,000-year empire plus is now fallen. And this is a very dark day because the Eastern Europeans are suddenly put under the auspices of the Islamic Ottoman Empire. Well, the Ottomans under Suleiman I are going to start to exert themselves upon the Christians. Now, what they will do is they will bring in a new religion, the Muslims, of course, Islam, and they will adopt a new their new alphabet and new setting in amongst the Christians. But what will happen is they will begin to start to subjugate these people. And from about 1400 all the way up to 1800 in some cases, we will see these Christian areas under the control of Islam. Now, it's going to be very difficult because Christians, they don't necessarily force you to convert, but they make it very unpleasant for you. And one of the ways they do it is they start to formulate a military, which is called the Janissaries. These Janissaries will take slaves from the Christians, young kids, and train them to fight for the Sultan. And then these boys will be converted to Islam and later be used as soldiers against uprisings. Now, also, Suleiman has gotten an advantage. One of the ways he was able to defeat those large walls that we had talked about at Constantinople was he had developed cannons, artillery pieces, that were able to blow massive holes in the walls. And after a very strong fight in 1453, he was able to subjugate and conquer Constantinople. So we start to see the Eastern Orthodox kingdom is kind of fallen down. And now where will Orthodoxy start to rise again? Well, it's no longer welcome necessarily in Constantinople. It'll move up into Moscow, into the Russian principates, and will continue there as the principal faith. Now, also we're going to see that there's going to be a lot of controversy. Not all of these countries or areas are going to easily fall under the realm of Islam. There's a story in the book about Vlad the Impaler, the Dracula of Romania. Well, he's the defender of Christendom, and he fights valiantly against the Islamic forces. And he's very brutal about putting down Islam. You may want to read that section of the story. It's going to be very important because it's very, very interesting. And it rises to our legend about Dracula. Not that he was sinking teeth into people's necks, but the way he suppressed, how brutally he suppressed his opponents. Now, where does Christendom move to? The Eastern Christian Orthodox faith move to? Well, it moves to Rome. And it is championed by Ivan III, or what we will call Ivan the Terrible. Ivan was also a very, very, how should one say, very strong leader, for lack of a better term. Well, Ivan essentially helps put down any challengers to his throne, and he is able to unite the Rus people and push back the Mongols and establish himself as the new leader of what we call today the Russian state. He will also assume the role of being the heir to the Byzantine Empire, the one that's going to help promote the Eastern Orthodox faith, Christian faith, during this period. Okay, well, this is pretty much all we have for this chapter. You may want to kind of review this again. Also look at the videos a little more extensively for content. This is kind of an important area because this is a prelude to our chapter 10, which is going to be the Renaissance. Well, take care.